Welcome to the Animal Training Academy podcast show. I'm your host, Ryan Cartlidge, and I'm passionate about helping you master your animal training skills using the most positive and least intrusive approaches. Here at ATA, we understand that navigating the vast challenges you encounter in training requires a comprehensive base of knowledge and experience. It's common to face obstacles and rough patches on your journey that can leave you feeling overwhelmed and stressed. Therefore, since 2015, we've been on a mission to empower animal training geeks worldwide. We've aided thousands in developing their skills, expanding their knowledge, boosting their confidence, and maximizing their positive impact on all the animal and human learners they work with. We are excited to do the same for you. Simply visit www.atamember.com, join our vibrant community, and geek out with us. And of course, in the meantime, enjoy this free podcast episode as we explore new ways to help you supercharge your training skills, grow your knowledge, and build your confidence, so that you can craft a life that positively impacts every learner you encounter. We will dive into today's episode for part 2 of my conversation with Ryan Talbot. And if you haven't listened to the first part of our conversation, you can find it in the previous episode on whatever app you're listening to this show on. In that episode, we explored Ryan's journey and getting started with positive reinforcement animal training and what led him to his current role as the Behavior Enrichment and Training Manager at Wolf Park, Indiana. It's definitely worth a listen. However, if you haven't listened to it yet, you are, of course, welcome to start right here with part 2, where we're still going to gain plenty of insights to help you grow your skills, knowledge, and confidence in animal training. So let's dive in. Ryan, thank you for spending 3 hours with me today and coming back to hang out and geek out on part 2. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. Thanks so much for having me. It's always fun to geek out with fellow behavior geeks and nerds.
Fellow Ryans.
Today
we're gonna talk about wolves, and we haven't. Yeah, this is episode 260 something, I believe. Maybe pushing up close to 270. We've never done an episode specifically on wolves in that time, so excited to break from that and dive into, for an entire episode, about Wolf Park, where you work, and about training. So let's kick off with talking about Wolf Park. What does Wolf Park do? How does it operate? And tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, sure. So Wolf Park is a wildlife center located in kind of northwestern Indiana in the United States. It was founded in 1972 by Dr. Eric Klinghammer. He was an ethologist by training, and he actually he'd taken a page out of Conrad Lorenz's book, essentially, and was studying bird behavior and socializing and printing the birds so that he could study their behavior up close. And then became allergic to birds. So he had always had a fondness for canines, had an opportunity to get some wolves from the Brookfield Zoo. So we ended up with 2 wolves, and he opened Wolf Park essentially in 1972. So he stayed pretty much dedicated to the ethology ethos, if you will. And used the population of the wolves at the park to study their behavior, and kept up with that really intense socialization, so that the wolves, while we have to acknowledge that their behavior is certainly modified by being in human care and the fact that they see us as, I guess, maybe as social peers, they were still able to sort of express all of their otherwise natural wolf behaviors, certainly around each other or with conspecifics, which is what Eric, being an ethologist, was very interested in. And throughout the years, we've had folks have part of their careers with us, notably Doug Smith, who ran the Yellowstone Wolf Project for a number of years, instrumental in getting that started. and currently Tom Gable, who is one of the leads at the Voyagers Wolf Project up in Minnesota, and many other folks who've come through the park and had it touch them in some way, myself included, obviously, I think. So our mission basically is to sort of raise awareness for wolves, what maybe give folks like a different perspective or a different lens into their lives a little bit. So wolves, like a lot of wild animals, maybe don't really like being around humans, or certainly if they detect humans, and they're, in the free roaming population, you might see mostly escape or avoidance behaviors. So it's tough, especially in really good wolf habitat, to kind of see what wolves are doing, sort of out in the wild. They're usually going to be in very brushy areas. That's where their food tends to live. So your large ungulates, like your deer, moose, or elk, or bison, or what have you. And yeah, so you can't really you can't really get a good idea of what wolves are doing kind of on their own time, outside of these little glimpses. And yeah, of course, the cultural history that many folks in the States and the Northern Hemisphere in general, a lot of it stemming from Europe, has sort of maligned wolves over the years. So they have this really bad rap, as folks would maybe apply the labels of like evil or malicious, or nothing terribly flattering to their role in the ecosystem and to their role on the planet. So Eric, having emigrated from Germany actually back in the 50s to the United States, had observed from a plane just the vast wilderness expanses as he was flying over the States that we still possessed. And having come from Europe, which he described as sort of like a cultured garden, he really wanted to instill in the population here that like we have this wonderful gift of these still fairly certainly not 100% pristine, but like still these vast expanses of wild areas, and that's very important to protect them. And wolves are sort of like an iconic part of symbology for wilderness in the Northern Hemisphere, I feel like, and he felt like as well. So if we can make folks appreciate wolves and want to protect them, then by extension, hopefully they'll also want to protect these areas, because this is the kind of habitat and ecosystems they need to really thrive and survive. And they're one of these like sort of really charismatic, megafauna, right? Like a wolf is there's a lot of romantic notions on both sides of like, how cool they are, how evil they are, that people carry with them. So it's certainly an attention getter. So if you're looking to kind of get people to buy into and pay attention to some messaging you have about protecting the ecosystem, protecting the environment, and protecting species other than humans, there's certainly a good ambassador as far as that goes. So, and then the fact that we I do have them so well socialized, they tend to just do their regular wolfy behavior right in front of complete strangers. So, when crowds are coming through for tours or for public programs and everything, they're watching the wolves just sort of be themselves. The wolves oftentimes, their behavior is modified, of course, somewhat, because they also enjoy watching human TV. So they want to kind of come up and see what everybody's all about. But we love that, because that is probably a decent indicator that, they're not terribly stressed out by the presence of a bunch of crowds of strange folks kind of milling around their living space. So we've got 8 wolves, 2 red foxes, 2 gray foxes, and 10 bison, all, and an eastern box turtle. And they all sort of course, they didn't willingly sign a contract, but they're all serving functionally as ambassadors for their species to help, hopefully garner some empathy from the public, so that their free roaming wild brethren can have a really good quality of life. And of course, since they are in our care, it's our goal to make sure that they're having a really good quality of life as well, and to kind of push that conversation forward and push that technology forward, and disseminate that for folks who are interested.
Always find it interesting to be like, because you said they don't know what their role is. Always kind of find it interesting to be like, what would that look like for humans that would be in some kind of alien zoo? Because our Earth was screwed, and like we were like, there's humans born there, like so didn't have any concept of planet Earth, and we we're like advocating for the survival of their species.
Our species, right? Yeah, and that actually just made me think about it. Ambassador is really kind of an apt term, I guess, because you're sort of being like, an ambassador might be somebody who's just getting embedded in this completely alien culture to them and advocating for their culture, or for their nation or their culture, or sort of representing them. So I guess the label sort of fits, even though they're not sort of in the non-human uh, examples, they're not really aware of their role.
Remind me of work I did when working as an employee in zoos with species like crocodilians. Like we would have massive saltwater crocodiles, and the perception of these animals is just generally one of fear, and they're gonna kill you.
Yep. Yep.
Which, and then thinking about species like or families of animals like sharks, and then movies like
Oh yeah.
Jaws, and I know
Right.
there's some crocodile movies. I can't remember them off the top of my head, but like how popular culture has really clouded any understanding of these species and the role they fit into ecosystems. And is that similar with wolves? Do you find like the
Yeah.
romanticizing that you've mentioned kind of really
I don't.
brings a significant misunderstanding for the average person when they first come into contact with your park and what you do, and learning about the wolves you've got there?
Yeah, 100%. And I think, as far as the people who visit, they visit for different reasons. So I would say it certainly runs the gamut, but we definitely have folks who, may have wandered in, or not necessarily wandered in, but they're there, and they come with those notions already in their head from popular media, and even popular media, like going back as far as like, medieval fairy tales, right? Like, Little Red Riding Hood and all these, this, and then certainly now, like, we've got movies like The Gray, and I think you can't think of others off the top of my head, but they're certainly, wolves do not, they end up in villain roles, portrayed as villains more often than not in a lot of popular media. And again, probably stemming from that European culture, where that was just something that folks were terrified about. But like, I'm gonna be way out of my lane here. But like, not throughout the entire of human history, even in that geolocation, right? Because at some point, when we were probably more on the hunter-gatherer side of things, wolves are maybe a bit more beneficial to our existence in that, we probably gave each other information about prey. And certainly there's like hypotheses floating around about like, whether there was any collaboration early on between the two species as far as hunting and things go. But as we settled down, became agrarians, I think we maybe started to label them more as threats to our livestock and things like that. And or pastoralists, rather, sorry, not agrarians. When we were just growing vegetables, we probably still liked them because they were keeping the herbivores at bay that ate all of our food. But became more pastoralists, and adopting and domesticating sheep and goats and other animals that we're using for our needs, that it became easy, I think, to start to reframe a wolf as a villain in those contexts. So yeah, I'm not the authority on where all that came from, though. So
And I feel like it's kind of worked in their favor as well, because conservation projects involving wolves and the successful reintroduction, regardless of how people feel about that, because I know that for some people that is challenging with regards to their livelihoods and farmers, but they tend to. I feel like they tend to have some notoriety around the world with regards to conservation projects and being an ambassador, not just for wolves in the wild, but conservation in general. Is that kind of been your experience?
yeah, I think I'd agree with that. I think that's one of those lightning rod kind of species where people just have really strong opinions about them, and And there are certainly cases where, and there's a phenomenon, I think, where like, statistically in the United States, at least, less than 1% of livestock losses can be attributed to wolves in areas where wolves and livestock kind of overlap. A lot of the losses to things like disease and weather and just bad luck, things like that. Which isn't to say that there are some producers that have had another form of bad luck, and that a maybe a particular wolf pack in that area has hit that same producer over and over and over again. So they're sort of carrying the load of that statistic, whereas other producers aren't having any problems or very few problems. In those cases, certainly you have to take measures to deal with that. But I think the thing is, you can't shoot the weather, right? Like you can do some things about disease, but like you can't go out there and point, and like you're sort of at the mercy of the environment when that's what ends up causing your losses. And you could make an argument that like, well, that's also the case for predators on the landscape as well. But folks feel like they have more control. We can maybe relate to this, right? They feel like they have more control or kind of control over wolves or predators on the landscape than they do the weather. So that's what they kind of, I think, maybe tend to make big contentious issues about, because they feel like that is something that they can do. And then in the United States as well, there's sort of an attitude of, especially in areas where wolves were reintroduced, because that was a federal program, and we sort of have this schism sometimes in our society of like states or communities sort of distrusting or disliking the larger parts of government around them. So they would view the wolves as sort of like this federal overstep, that the wolves are now in their area, that the community and the state didn't want them there, but the feds forced them there. And so it may not even be necessarily that the wolves themselves are what they dislike, but they're sort of now become like this avatar or this effigy for like the federal government that they can then direct their discontent towards. So it's complicated.
It's political, eh? I didn't realize that. And then to help guide my next questioning, like we're on a podcast who's, to borrow a metaphor from Dr. Friedman, our bullseye is applied behavior analysis, but all of those outer rings are different sister sciences and levels of analysis, and just super curious to learn a little bit about wolf ethology and their natural history. Are those questions okay directed at you? Like we can just talk about applied behavior analysis, but can we talk a little bit about the natural history of wolves?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and again, I have some knowledge there. I'm not a wolf biologist, but so when we're talking about like their behavior as it exists in a free roaming wild setting, I'm going to be much less of an authority, but like there's a lot of overlap. So wolves, most people will sort of associate wolves with terms like wolf pack, and that's for good reason. They do tend to live in packs in free roaming wild settings. Those packs, which some folks might not know, do tend to be just sort of the breeding pair, so like mom and dad, and then just a couple generations of their kids. And they are larger carnivores, so they run between like let's say 25 to like 60 kilos, depending on where they are and what they're eating and all that, sex and whatnot. But because of that, they tend to have to eat larger things. So that's generally going to be larger ungulates. So again, that's your deer, elk, moose, caribou, anything kind of in that family to survive. They will certainly opportunistically take advantage of whatever calories they can find. They are built for a feast or famine diet, and they are capable of eating up to 30% of their body weight in one shot. So that is advantageous for them, because as much as we maybe sometimes romanticize like packs and pack hunting and how like efficient it might be, they're actually not terribly efficient. They're that 10 to 30% of the time they're going to come back victorious with any kind of kill. And it's a very risky business to be a wolf and out hunting those larger prey because they are what we would call cursorial predators, meaning they have to chase their prey down. So you can imagine if you had to jog after every meal, and only getting that meal 10 to 30% of the time, you might be burning a lot of calories. And if you're just trying to jog down a hamburger, you might be tired when you get there, but you can just eat the hamburger. Wolves have to jog down these animals and then still try to kill them and take them down. And if you think about it, if you're chasing something like a deer, you're probably right behind it. And the rear legs on most of those animals are quite powerful. And even a white-tailed deer will easily put a hole in a wolf's skull, no problem. Certainly break a lot of teeth and everything else. So it's very, very risky. It's a very hard life. The average lifespan of wolves in the wild is about 3 to 5 years, depending on the area we're talking about. Bringing down that statistic is the fact that 50% of the pups don't make it through their first winter from lack of nutrition. And the number one cause of wolf mortality outside of human influence is starvation. They just can't get enough food. And then the number two cause of wolf mortality outside of human influence, and these two do actually kind of bounce back and forth in the top 1-2 slot because of boom bust prey cycles, but would be wolf on wolf mortality. So not necessarily within the pack, but as resources become constrained, like they can't find enough food in the area that they've claimed as their territory, they still need food to survive. So they're going to have to kind of take a risk and start moving outside of their territory to go and find more food. And if that area is already occupied by other wolves facing those same struggles, they got to feed their families first. So that's when we start to see wolves actually fighting each other for keeps. Within the pack, they have this very rich body language that exists in our dogs today, in various modified, hypertrophied, or atrophied forms, but that lets them communicate with each other within the pack to settle resource disputes in a way that generally does not result in injury. So a lot of ritualized aggression around resource disputes. And that's very advantageous for them as well, because they cannot afford, they're already living a very hard life and kind of relying on each other a little bit to help feed everyone. And you can't really afford to be putting holes in each other or breaking each other's bones, because that makes them less efficient hunters. And even a puncture wound, could be a death sentence. There's veterinarians running around the wild looking to patch wayward wolves up. So we've got this very rich body language, again, that we see in our dogs today to try and settle these disputes. And even if it escalates to where like teeth are, being put on another body, it's very inhibited. Wolves are incredibly fair with how much pressure they put on each other and ourselves in our socialized interspecies interactions. But looks very dramatic. There's lots of very loud growling, hackles all the way, from the neck all the way down to the tip of the tail. Sort of lunging, snarling, snapping, spit flying everywhere. You might find a wolf on the what we might label the losing end of that argument, on their back and whining or screaming and maybe peeing on themselves, urinating on themselves. But then usually after the interaction is over, they shake off and nobody's got any holes or anything in them. And again, they just have to rely on each other to survive. So they cannot afford to really be damaging each other. Now, which isn't to say that in the wild, at some point, some of those kids in that pack aren't going to be like, okay, you know what? The social pressure dealing with my siblings has been enough. And actually, it's been great, mom and dad, thanks. But I'd like to maybe move out of the basement and go strike my own fortune. So that's when we start to see them disperse, usually mostly more often the males will disperse first and maybe a bit younger, around 2 years of age or so, and see if they can go find a mate somewhere and start their own pack, start their own territory. Sometimes the females will hang back. It is a hard life. There's a lot of churn and turnover. So it's very likely that the breeding female, their mother, might have some tragedy befall them or just not be able to kind of be successful breeding anymore. And that female may just sort of inherit her spot. That's advantageous for the females staying behind because they'll already be familiar with the resources that they really need to help raise puppies, like denning locations, rendezvous locations for the pups. So there's maybe a bit more of a bias towards the females not leaving the natal area as often as the males do. And all those territories and stuff are also sort of fluid. Like nothing in nature is ever like a static snapshot. So like the territory shapes kind of change, and then even within the territories, the wolves are kind of moving around as a blob, and they don't always stay together all the time, especially in the warmer months. They might spread out quite a bit as it becomes again more difficult to find food. Ironically, in the summer they have a harder time finding food. Their prey tends to be very strong at that time of year, and strong prey are not something that wolves have an easy time taking down. They're looking for sort of the ends of the bell curve where they are disadvantaged in some way. They're weak, they're sick, they're old, they've had an injury. Those are the types of prey that the wolves are going to try and select. But in the middle of summer, when there's just tons of food everywhere for herbivores, they're all feeling pretty good, and the wolves have to kind of spread out far and wide to try and get enough food for everybody, which is where behaviors like howling kind of come into play, so they keep in touch with each other and all of that stuff. But that's a maybe broad overview of some of their natural history. Trying to think what else I could go. I can talk about wolves for a really long time. So if there are specific questions that might be useful, I'm happy to try and answer them.
It's always so surprising, I think, to learn the difference between longevity and human care versus wild wolves. So, like, what kind of lifespans are you seeing in captive wolves?
Yeah, I'd say across the board, 12 to 14 years is about what most folks see. So about similar to a similar sized dog. But at the park, we've been pretty fortunate over the years. Our average has been closer to like 16. So much better in human care than.
So I think we forget sometimes to be grateful in our own human lives for things like antibiotics or like even like penicillin, like paracetamol, even
absolutely right.
Our kids would have died. Like, my kid probably be dead. Like they had an infection 50 years ago. So there in Indiana, am I correct? You don't have natural populations of wolves in Indiana?
No, we did historically, but in fact, most of North America, at least in the United States and down in parts of Mexico and certainly all the way through Canada, did historically have wolves, but all of the ones here were extirpated at the turn of the last century, more or less. So we don't have them currently. There have been a few dispersers coming down from like the closest population, which would be around the woods of Wisconsin, northwest of here, and they would sort of shoot around the sort of southern end of the Great Lakes in the Midwest, and on their way is probably again, just dispersing animals, looking to find their own fortune. And I believe they were both mistaken for coyotes and shot and killed. Nothing here currently. Not terribly great habitat here in Indiana at the moment. We have a lot of industrial agriculture, so vast swaths of corn and soybeans. Not a lot of the wooded areas. We certainly have tons of white-tailed deer, but I think the human population is maybe a bit dense in most areas for them to thrive well.
And then, so you got 8 wolves at the park?
8 wolves at the park currently, yep.
And what, for those who are listening, and for me, because I don't know, like, what species are they? How many different species globally of wolf are they? Like, are they a different species?
Yeah, like... that's a really fun question. With everybody's favorite answer is it depends.
Yeah. Okay. Well, give us your answer.
Yeah. So all of our wolves that we have currently are just sort of your run-of-the-mill generic gray wolves. So canines, as I think most of us are probably familiar with, are incredibly plastic in their genetics. And so as much as humans love to like throw groups of animals into boxes and label them like this is a brush wolf, this is a timber wolf, this is a Rocky Mountain, boulder scrabbling wolf, nature really sort of takes that and just goes blah and makes a big smeary spectrum out of it. Wolves can disperse thousands of miles from their natal territories and take their genetics with them. So right now, I think kind of the way I tend to view it is there's gray wolves, which are mostly just what are roaming around North America and a lot of Europe. And then once you get way far towards the Arctic Circle, you have the subspecies Arctic wolves, which are, again, completely interfertile with the gray wolves and coyotes and dogs. So depending on your definition of species, they're all one species. But then we also currently treat red wolves as a separate species. They're incredibly endangered. The only wild population right now is in a nature reserve in North Carolina on the East Coast, and then a smaller sort of reservoir population on an island down south. Most of their population is actually in human care right now in a breeding program, and then the same kind of goes for Mexican wolves, which are considered a subspecies, whereas red wolves are considered a separate species at the moment. So Mexican wolves are considered a subspecies of gray wolf, and they're also incredibly endangered. Again, most of their population is in captivity, with a small wild population between the states of Arizona and New Mexico. And as is often the case, they would actually be fine and probably flourishing and recovering, no problem, if humans will just sort of back off and let them do their thing. The environment they'll adapt to the environment, they will do well. But politics and humans entering into the fray have limited their abilities to sort of expand. And both of those populations, the red and the Mexican wolves, have gone through like incredible genetic bottlenecks because they were nearly extinct in the wild when they were the last members are kind of pulled into human care just to try and save the genetics. But there were not a lot of genetics to kind of spread around. So yeah, and again, they're all interfertile with coyotes, and nature is real good at just trying to solve problems by encouraging gene flow, but it becomes tough for humans, right, to try and protect those things, because the way our laws are written anyways is it's written to protect a species or maybe a subspecies, but what does that mean? Are you protecting just the genetic line? Because if currently it's a problem where if a red wolf, which sort of at first glance looks very similar to a wolf coyote cross, breeds with a coyote out in that wild area, those offspring are usually culled because it'll dilute the red wolf population, and that's not something that's protectable with the way the laws are written. But then that's tricky because we think that maybe nature's just going to shape, whatever organisms are in that area to sort of fill that ecological role, regardless of what our ideas about their genetics are. But it's just tricky when you again have humans kind of trying to manage things, and we like to put things in boxes so we can legislate around them. And again, in nature, it's much more of a spectrum, especially when we're talking about something as plastic as canines.
Unfortunate in ways, but also logical in ways.
It is, yeah. Like I don't have a good alternative solution necessarily to hand. I guess maybe it'd be cool if we protected the role or just the environment and just everything inside it, maybe. But but of course, wolves and coyotes don't stay in one place either. They move all over, and as they're moving, their populations are adapting to the areas that they currently live. The coyotes out west are much smaller than ones out east, due to what they're eating and their climate. So yeah, it's tough. And it's never a static snapshot. Like everything's dynamic. Evolution's always occurring, learning's always occurring, everything's always occurring and feeding back into each other.
So let's pivot into some of the work you do with the individuals you have at the park. The 8 wolves. How many foxes did you say?
We have 2 red foxes and 2 gray foxes, and then 10 bison and an eastern box turtle.
Love the eastern box turtle.
Yeah.
And the training is happening across all individuals?
So currently it's mostly the wolves, and we're trying to bring the other species in line with the same sort of programming, the same sort of interventions. But the wolves have most of the learning history for it currently.
And how long have you been there? 10 years, did you say? Since you kind of first visited, was it?
Man, I started volunteering in 2007. I didn't move up here until 2014 though. Yeah. So I've been more intensely hands-on for the past 10 years or so than I had been previously.
Yeah. And when you started volunteering or when you first moved there, you answered the question in whatever timeline is most relevant for this question. What was the training program? Was the training program there and you kind of stepped into an already existing program, or did you build a training program kind of from what you'd been learning?
So there was a little bit of a training program there. Yeah, there were certain behaviors that were getting reinforced pretty heavily. A lot of it was sort of like stationing, going on platforms and things like that. There wasn't a lot of medical care that was trained per se. A lot of the medical care we had been doing historically had been banking on sort of individual handlers' relationships with the wolves. So wolf would approach and would be seemingly perfectly fine, or even the human would approach in some cases, and they could, they can just sort of trim nails, and the wolf didn't seem to react. Or folks, for vaccination rounds, a couple people would maybe be scratching the wolves. The wolves would be like, "Oh yeah, scratches feel great," and somebody would just kind of slip in the injection while that was happening. So low stress. It worked beautifully when it worked, and but there were certainly some individuals that maybe didn't love having that were maybe more difficult. Like they did not. It was not likely that you would be able to go approach them and trim their nails, or maybe if they saw two people approaching them, they're like, no, this seems sketchy. There might be a shot, and they would start to escape or avoid us. So it was kind of an evolutionary process as more folks that were more training minded kind of started to accumulate at the park. We all started kind of making inroads into training some of these behaviors, or trying to get these behaviors set up where they can be trained more cooperatively. And then a lot of that looked like too, and some of this was still certainly extant at the time. They would just offer food, like a big sausage or a thing of cheese that they could just sort of like dole out in small portions, and sort of this continuous reinforcement, or synchronous reinforcement for having the procedure done. And that would work sometimes as well. But we were looking for maybe a clearer, better way that would also work, maybe importantly, for when food wasn't available or couldn't be used. So certainly for things like being sedated for surgery, we can't have anything in the stomach really. So we need to make sure that the behaviors are going to still be attainable without a food reward available. And then also sort of to like, there's this idea of a bus factor, which is how many people can get hit by a bus and your programs are still successful. And so we wanted to increase our bus factor a bit, because we were relying very heavily on, we'd have to call one specific person to do something with one specific wolf, or else it just wouldn't work. Nobody else had that relationship with that animal. And again, that's great and beautiful to watch, but it does the animal a disservice in the long run. In case anybody ever happens to that person, they get transferred, they're sick. And that also is not entirely fair to that individual human either, because that means maybe vacations get harder, maybe taking trips get harder, and it's a lot of pressure sometimes to have to be the person that's always like on call to go deal with those really difficult situations. So being able to kind of give the wolves skills, the idea was to basically give them skills that would stick with them, and the antecedents and the cues that were like around that behavior that didn't necessarily involve a particular human being a part of that picture, or generalize it to more humans essentially. So that's kind of where we started to get moving in that direction.
And how did you? I love that, the bus factor. I hadn't thought about that. But speaking to anyone listening who is working in a zoological organization, or even a non-zoological organization, but working with domestic species, where you're an employee, there's and I'm thinking about experiences in my career. One where I trained an eagle up using positive reinforcement. That was when I started flying at my face when I walked into its enclosure, to calmly stepping onto my glove and let me manipulate its feet and bring it out for weighing and putting telemetry radio tracking gear on it and everything we needed. Basically, it was like a big teddy bear. But when I left, I was really upset, because they then tethered that bird to a pole, and it lost a lot of its freedom and agency. But in reflection, like, I was the only one that could work with it. I got hit by a bus.
Right.
Right. And then so I appreciate now, been reflecting on this a lot recently, actually, the welfare impact of not thinking about that. How did you, because it sounds like that's a big part of your program now. Like, how did you learn to focus on that, or did you just know that instinctively from the start? Like, how did that kind of
Yeah, and I'm trying to think back to remember specifically. I think what we kind of needed as a goal were to was to like try and create um, cues that would invite the learners into our space as kind of like step one, because I think right off the bat that was a really good indication as to whether or not they were going to participate in a procedure. And it was also incompatible with this sort of previous methodology of like, well, they're right over there, I'm just going to walk over and do it because I can. And so if we were flipping that around to where the animals then had to approach, the wolves had to approach us, it started that conversation of like, okay, well, now they're coming over to engage. We're giving them a little more agency in how this goes. And then now from there, now that they are in front of you, now we have to have some other cues that ask essentially like, hey, is this okay? Can we do this next procedure? Maybe can we start going down this path? And Kaz Brooks, I mentioned in part one, was kind of my wolf training partner in crime. And they're now doing amazing work at the Brookfield Zoo. But we had thought of this as kind of like a skill tree, right? Like if anybody's ever played video games and you're like a role playing game, you've got like this, you can do this skill now that unlocks the ability to maybe go down and do these other skills. So we thought that sort of paradigm made sense. And we would build it around behaviors that made sense for us to get procedures done that we needed. So, for instance, we had right around this time several wolves that had needed eye drops, like in a fairly short span of time. For whatever, wolves are hotter than eyeballs sometimes, running around doing wolf stuff. So we needed a way to get eye drops in their eyes. And again, previously, folks had kind of relied on getting a sausage sort of wedged in a gate area, which would sort of wedge the wolf's head in there as they were trying to eat the sausage while somebody else was trying to drop the eye drops in. And like, again, that worked. And some folks would probably label that as cooperative. But we were, kind of thinking like, something about it though doesn't smell quite right. Like they are trying to get that sausage and they would probably prefer to avoid getting the eye drops if at all possible. So we were trying to aim for, is there a way that we can get them to actually just do the procedure? And then, we would still obviously reward them at the end of it. But we felt like if we were going to use the labels cooperative, or especially the one like voluntary, we needed to see participation that wasn't just trying to eat that food while we hope and pray that we can like get the procedure done before we run out of food, essentially. So like, yes, it's cooperative in that they're not trying to take a chunk out of us, but maybe not in the way I would think about cooperating with like a human coworker. So, or collaborating with a human coworker, or anything like that. So, so we decided that like, okay, well, let's come up with some cues that say, essentially hand us this part of your body that we need access to do a procedure. And that was like kind of our start button. I think there's a term that gets used. Yeah, folks might be familiar with that. Now we tend to use at the park the language of an assent behavior, essentially. So that's kind of what it evolved into. But at the very first part, we were just like, hey, can you just come over and start participating? That'd be great. And then we said that, okay, once they've given us that body part, we have to give them some other signal that the conditions are changing and that another piece of the procedure is about to begin. So for like eye drops, okay, great, you're giving me your head. Now I'm going to raise a dropper over your eye and I'm going to say eyes, or something like that. I'm going to wait for those eyes to look up at me before doing a drop or a simulated drop. And then if at any point in time they pull their head up out of that target, chin rest essentially, then we stop the procedure. Like, okay, they've withdrawn their assent, they don't want to participate, and then we kind of go back and figure out, all right, do we need to slice? How do we get back to a yes, right? Like, so what went wrong to make that procedure not go off the way we'd hoped in that moment? And then we have to also, we decided we needed to be comfortable with that Sometimes the answer might be, we don't know. We have to be okay with that. The answer was like, no, might just mean no, not right now, for reasons that you can't ever know because it's inside your learner's head and we don't have access to it. Because I think we can all sort of empathize with that idea that sometimes just having a bad day, or there's, you got a headache or something, and something you're normally totally happy to do, now is just not a really good time to ask for it or to do that. And we're gifted with this vocal verbal behavior of being able to speak a human language, and we can explain to other folks of why those things might be. But our non-human learners do not have that gift, and we don't have the technology to get better info yet. So we just sort of have to take them at face value and say, cool, I heard you, I understand. We will try and figure out how to make this better for you at some time in the future, whether that's in a few seconds or tomorrow, so we get access to the body part, give them some information about what's going to happen next, let them continue to choose to participate or not. And then after the procedure is over with, we'd pay them out. And that was kind of the bulk of, I think, really the beginning of a lot of the cooperative care training that we're doing currently. And then as I got more exposed to this idea of assent and genuine assent from Linehan and colleagues that I mentioned in the previous talk, and this idea of for us to say, because again, to kind of sum it up a little bit, it can look like an animal is, or any organism, right, is doing something of their own volition or free will, which I guess really technically everybody is. But I think what we tend to do from there, though, is just because they're doing it means that we think they enjoy it, or that they are happy to do it, or that they're definitely 100% with us throughout the whole thing. And you can see some, and I've even done this myself. Like, I'll be really proud of a procedure that just happened. I'm like, yeah, wow, that was so cool. I can't believe we did this like really aversive thing. And then I'm like, oh, but did I really give them any other option to earn that reinforcement? Like, yeah, okay, they did it, but like, would I label that as voluntary? And and if there was no other way for them to access that same reinforcer, I might not label it as entirely voluntary. I might say that they were maybe a bit coerced into doing it. And so as I got exposed to those concepts and that language from Anna Linehan and the papers that they put out, and the symposiums and things that I've seen them participate in, that really started to drive home this concept of, okay, so like, we can have a learner appear to assent to a procedure, and that's great. But it really behooves us to inform our programming, and to inform the way that we communicate with the public, I think, too, at least in our particular role, to try and get their genuine assent as much as possible. So the distinction there between the apparent assent and the genuine assent is how many other ways, how many other behaviors, how many other contingencies can they select to access that same critical reinforcer, same critical consequence. And this is all laid out in the literature, and I'm probably going to end up misquoting some of this, to be perfectly honest. But folks like Joe Lang and Paul Andronis, building on the work of Israel Gold Diamond from back in the, sorry, the paper's falling down there, from back in the last century, have kind of informed these ideas and given us these wonderful definitions of this concept of like degrees of freedom. So or let me back that up a little bit. So when we're working with our learners, they're working for a certain consequence, right? Like we're setting up the antecedents, they're giving us these behaviors so that they can access some consequence, contact some consequence. And really, when you think about it, there's like, at any given point in time, probably an infinite number of contingencies they can select, right? There's a number of things they can do. They can, but only a small subset of those are going to lead to something that's probably going to be worth anything to them. Because anything can have consequences, but some of those consequences we just don't care about. but a subset of those are going to lead to a consequence that's actually very important to them. And the one that's most likely to control the outcomes of future behavior, we would label as the critical consequence. So, and then Gold Diamond basically said that the number of contingencies you can select from at any given time that lead to the same critical consequence define your degrees of freedom. So if you have 3 different contingencies you can select that access that same consequence, then you have 2 degrees of freedom. It's whatever many ways you have to access that -1. And for us to say when an animal's doing a procedure, or we're evoking some behavior in a certain antecedent setting, we can only say that they were genuinely assenting to that procedure if they had at least 1 degree of freedom. So there was at least one other thing they could have done to get that same access. So they had like a more real choice. And so that started to really hit home, especially as I was starting to train more and more aversive procedures like blood draws and rectal temps and things like that. It's like, okay, cool, they're doing it, but like now it's time to really test the waters. Like, are they, how strong is this behavior? And then also like, we talked about guilt a little bit in the last one. I almost started to feel a little bit guilty when they were going through these really aversive procedures and then coming back and giving us that assent behavior again, like putting the head down in the block or giving me the paw again or whatever to say, okay, I'm ready for another round. I'd give them the same procedural cue, like, okay, I'm going to stab you again. Are you cool with that? And they'd be like, yeah, let's do it. And I was starting to wonder, I'm like, am I doing the right thing? Like, is this okay? Like, they're coming back and contacting what I would think would be these potential aversives to get these rewards. And it started to make me feel a little gross. And I will always remember the first time that one of the wolves, Sparrow, the first one we trained to do a blood draw, I pulled out the syringe, and while she was, looking at me and looking at the syringe, she had her paw on a target saying, here's my leg. And I pulled out the syringe, and she pulled her paw off the target and put her feet just sort of neutral, staring at me. And I put the syringe away. The paw came back on the target. And I was like, and I pulled the syringe back out. The paw came off again. I was like, okay, thank goodness. I think she maybe at least has an idea that she can tell me no. And this is an animal that I would label as very biddable. I don't get no out of her very often. And I was really afraid that like I had screwed up somewhere, and I've just put so much reinforcement history on this behavior that she's just doing it. And that, maybe she didn't feel like she had a way out. But then to see her actually like sort of communicate in that way, or what I think she was communicating in that way, I was more elated to have her actually say no. I think that was the first time I got a blood flash. So, so then it's been kind of really this focus to make sure that like, we're always honoring that no, and we're always looking for a way to make sure that all their yeses are like very enthusiastic yeses, and not just tolerating some procedure that we're doing to them. And then all this to say, I don't want to give people the wrong impression here. It's not like there's never scenarios where like we don't have to get something done, and then maybe there's not so much choice on the table. But like, I think the take home message is to make sure that those instances are very few and far between. Like, really, the training that we're trying to get in at the moment, or really, throughout this whole time, has been to sort of make sure that our emergencies aren't emergencies as much as we can. Like, make sure that like your learners have the skills to, at least deal with scenarios where they need to be sedated to go through something that maybe they're not ready for yet, or and then keep a mindset that like, if an animal says no to a vaccination or something, not being vaccinated on that exact day is not really an emergency. It's an inconvenience for sure. Like, it's an inconvenience to probably all the humans involved. But from that animal's perspective, they're telling you no for some reason, and that contract up to that point has been, if I tell you no, like these are the things that I expect. I would hate to break that contract just because I feel inconvenienced. Like, if they're bleeding out or they absolutely need it because this is a medical necessity, then like absolutely we're just gonna have to go down the ladder into more coercive things or more intrusive things. Go down that humane hierarchy or whatever we need to do to make sure that they're going to have a good health outcome. But I think it's also, really a paradigm shift into taking into account their view of the situation, and then whether or not what we might label as something that has to be done right now actually really truly does have to be done in that moment, or can we just go ahead and punt until tomorrow or till next week, or something along those lines. Even if it's inconvenient to us, but the way I view it is like it's kind of our job to be inconvenienced. Like we're here they didn't sign up for this, right? They didn't sign up to be in human care. So at the end of the day, we get to go home and contact all the consequences we could possibly want. We can go watch Netflix, we can go have a beer with our friends, we can eat whatever food we want to, we can play video games, whatever we want to do, right? These guys only have these little short windows relatively in every day to like have those conversations with us. So I think it behooves us to be maybe a little inconvenienced sometimes on their behalf due to that kind of power dynamic in that relationship.
Yeah, I feel like inconvenience is part of partnership. Like I feel like if we just prioritize our own comfort all the time, then others have to pick up the slack in a way, and this would be the wolf's kind of experience. So inconvenience, whether it's with wolves or with your husband or your wife or your friends, like inconvenience, you can't just live in convenience the whole time because the relationship won't work.
Football part, yeah, absolutely. And I think just the thing, to kind of, like I said, keep in mind is that like I hate to put more on their shoulders than they're already sort of carrying. So like if somebody has to be inconvenienced in that moment, I'd rather be the ones with like all the power and autonomy and agency, and less so the ones that are in a bit more of a constrained situation, to be what I view as maybe fair to them. But we're all human. We'll still get frustrated, and sometimes we'll have these little transgressions where folks maybe didn't fully honor the wolf or something. But like generally for like the big things, we're taking their views into account as best we can with the tools and technology that we have.
What would you say are the biggest? What would you say is the biggest difference between training a wolf versus training a dog, and what is the biggest similarity?
That's a really tough question. I think about this a lot actually, because I think I kind of mentioned on the last episode, wolves just sort of demand the respect that dogs deserve. So like now it's hard for me to tease back out because I don't treat them differently. Like I treat dogs like they're wolves. So and what does that mean? Let me see if I can unpack that a little bit. I guess, yeah, trying to respect their agency as much as possible and trying to, make sure that I'm honoring whatever communication that they're giving me with their body language or whatever behaviors they've had trained to sort of communicate their needs in the moment. So that, but like really, I think really, really honoring them though, because I feel like most folks either don't recognize maybe when a domestic dog is telling them no or trying to escape or avoid a situation. And I think most of the time folks will just sort of maybe try and power through it, or either through ignorance, just like keep doing what they're doing, or just decide, well, like, oh, either too bad, you're going to do this, or oftentimes too, I think folks misread things and think like, oh no, and it falls back to this idea of like apparent versus genuine in a sense, like, oh, well, they're doing it so he likes it or they like it or whatever, right? So, and I think a dog that is likely to escape or avoid those interactions via aggression rather than trying to move away or shut down or emit some other behavior that doesn't pose a risk to the human. We label those as bad or difficult dogs. They get all these sort of labels applied to them, and then they either end up in a shelter or euthanized, or have some increasing aversives applied to them to try and get that aggressive behavior to stop. Whereas I think with a wolf, because folks have this idea that it's like a wild animal, I think right off the bat, most folks are going to not. When they see those signs coming from a wolf, they're gonna probably stop what they're doing. They're gonna honor that no and be like, oh, well, because it's a wild animal telling me no, I'm more likely to try and stop it. But like, I'm here to say, if your Chihuahua is giving you giving you some signals that maybe it would like you to stop what you're doing or want something to change in the environment, that we should really pay attention to that and honor it. Just because they're not potentially lethal to you doesn't make their needs any less important than an animal or learner that is potentially lethal to you. Like that should be the yardstick we're using.
Well, also in part two of asking, I guess, what they want to see happen in the next 5 to 10 years in the training world. But I feel like we can leverage the small time we have left to ask a different question here, because you kind of answered that with what you just said. So I'm curious to hear, to wrap up, what is your favorite training story from your time at Wolf Park?
Oh my gosh, I'll tell it. So actually, I think this will tie into a little bit. So one of the wolves that I was very close to, very dear to me, named Ayla, she had a nickname of Junebug. And for those that aren't familiar, that's a beetle in North America that has a very erratic flight pattern. And they're out around May and June. She got that nickname because when you're walking her on leash, she was just all over the place and was pulling usually quite hard on the leash the entire time. And that had kind of been how the wolves have been walked historically. At that point, they just sort of like pulled where they want to go, and the humans kind of followed along. And so she was doing this, and it took a bit of skill, physical skill, to be able to manage those kinds of situations, which again sort of made that pool of people who could do it very small. And I was walking her, she was kind of pulling everywhere, and I was like, man, this is such a workout. And an intern next to me looked at me and goes, well, why don't you just teach her to walk on a slack leash? And I was in the middle of saying, because she's a wolf, when I stopped myself, and I was like, you know what? Why don't I just teach her to walk on a slack leash? So we did, and she ended up being a really fantastic wolf to take out for walks after we put that effort in and got everybody consistent on it. And then that became the norm, and now we've got wolves that are quite lovely to walk on leashes, and they really quite enjoy going out for walks and exploring the park. And it's actually how we let them kind of choose their social situations and which habitats they get to go into, and whose treasures they get to go dig up and pee all over by walking them around. And they will go up to the gates and sit in front of the gates for the habs they'd like to enter. And if it's safe to do so, we let them in. But that was probably my favorite thing, because that was like one of those really, I was catching myself almost being like, oh yeah, no, wait, why? There's the laws. And this was before I really had been exposed much to ABA and had like the language to think about it. But it's just like, yeah, no, the laws that govern learning and behavior apply to all earthlings. It doesn't matter as far as we know, what they are. So like, cheers to Julie for calling me out on that and changing that program.
Thank you, Julie. That was awesome. I could keep going. I feel like we've barely scratched the surface of some of the fun things we could talk about on these.
Yeah, and I feel like I rambled too. Sorry about that.
we love rambling. We call it passion talking here.
Yeah.
At Animal Training Academy, Ryan. So that's totally fine. Before we wrap up, can you just let everyone know again what they need to Google or where they can go to find Wolf Park online?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you go to wolfpark.org, that's our main website. And then if you look up Wolf Park on Facebook and Instagram, you're sure to find us. We're in Battleground, Indiana, just in case there's like no other Wolf Parks have showed up for me, but that might be my algorithm. But yeah, that's where you can find us.
Amazing. And we will, of course, link to that in the show notes as well. Ryan, this has been amazing. I love learning about wolves again. I could just keep talking and learning, and so many questions written down here that I was like, Christ, let's do a third episode, but we're not going to, but like we could. But thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. A pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
And thank you so much for listening as well. This is your host, Ryan Cartlidge, signing off from this episode of the Animal Training Academy podcast show. We hope today's conversation inspired you and equipped you with new tools for your trainer's toolbox. Remember, every challenge in training is an opportunity to learn and sharpen your animal training geekery. Embrace the rough patches, learn from them, and keep improving. And don't forget, the path to growing your skills and expanding your knowledge continues beyond this episode. Visit www.atamember.com to join our supportive membership, where you will find a community of trainers just like you. Together, we're making a huge positive difference in the lives of animal and human learners worldwide. Until next time, keep honing your skills, stay awesome, and remember, every interaction with an animal or human learner is your opportunity to create ripples. We're here cheering you on every step of the way. See you at the next episode.